of these things, especially in wet and warm climes, are gone very quickly. And so you have to have someone keeping them up, you know, and who kept up most of these documents? Well, the church, right? In the Dark Ages. I mean, people complain about the Catholic Church in the Dark Ages and whatever, but guess who was copying these documents meticulously by hand? These poor monks in the Catholic Church in the Dark Ages. So the Dark Ages weren't maybe dark because people weren't reading what they were writing down, but you know, for goodness sakes, someone was writing it, and that's the problem with a lot of these documents. Because, for example, the Book of Jubilees is a well-known book in antiquity, but it just didn't make the cut. Or maybe it got burned. Remember that a really neat book, what's that book by, about the murder mystery in the Name of the Rose? Do you remember that? Name of the Rose? They made a movie of it. Really neat movie, really neat book, but about a library that was in, I think, Italy, that was kept and burned. And so it was not uncommon to have accidents, you know, where your library's burned. If your library's burned, guess what happened to all those works and all that beautiful things? Yes, sir.
There was a story that early ancient Egypt, you know, Alexandria, they had a fantastic library full of scrolls, and it's all destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered if you had anything about that.
You know, I have researched that, and I've had that in my notes before. I don't have it today, right now, but you know, the library at Alexandria. First of all, I think I mentioned this in the class. Does anyone know the average number of scrolls in a library before there were codexes, when there were scrolls? Yeah, 3 to 6. And each scroll was the value, we know, was the value of a 40-acre estate. That's how expensive books were. So, you know, until the advent of the printing press, books were very expensive. Now, how many were in Alexandria? We've had, you know, ancient sources say there were thousands of volumes, or thousands of scrolls, because there was no books until the Christian period. And somehow it burned down. Now, the pagans want to blame the Christians, and the Christians want to blame the pagans. But look, when you put up on a bunch of parchment in the middle of a place and it dries out, especially in warm weather that they have in Egypt, you know, sometimes accidents happen. Plus, who knows, somebody might have been cooking their dinner there, you know, with a scroll, who knows. So, yeah, it's very unfortunate because in antiquity, we probably know, well, I've mentioned this before, there are 44 known Gospels. Of the 44 known, only 12 are extant. We have copies of them. And of the 12, only 4 are attributable Gospels. But we know of 44 in antiquity. They're gone. Either burned or lost or not copied, or maybe we'll find, maybe somebody will open up another, you know, Qumran, caves of Qumran, you know, the Dead Sea Scrolls location, and we'll find them, find some of these copies. But until then, you know, who knows? But in any case, this document was well known to early Christian writers because they quoted from it. And not only that, the New Testament alludes to it quite a bit. It is considered canonical for the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And they say, what is Ethiopian Orthodox Church? There were Jews in Ethiopia. And you remember the Ethiopian eunuch that was in the New Testament? Guess where he was going home to? Ethiopia. And the belief is in the early church, you know, we don't have a huge amount of documentation, but we do know that the Ethiopian church was very powerful and is today even a Christian group in Africa that has great roots in antiquity. And guess what? They have a lot of the ancient documents from this period. They had it, they call it the Book of Division, and it's in Ge'ez. Ge'ez is a type of language, is an Ethiopian language. In a modern kind of scholarly view, the belief is that the Book of Jubilees reworks material found in Genesis and Exodus in light of some concerns of 2nd century BC Jews, which is interesting. The Book of Jubilees claims to present the history of the division of the days of the law and the events of the U.S. What's called Jubilees. Remember the year of Jubilee every 50 years? Et cetera, et cetera. It's in addition to the Torah instruction. You guys know what the other addition to the Torah instruction is, right? The Mishnah. The Mishnah, the oral Torah. This claims to be, now remember, the oral Torah wasn't written down to about 100 AD. So, this is earlier. This is about 2nd century BC. And it's not the Mishnah. It's very interesting. Who were the guys that liked the Mishnah? Remember? The Pharisees were really into the Mishnah and the Talmud. Talmud was not written down. The Mishnah was not written down yet, not until about 100 AD. But guess who wrote it? The Pharisees did. What's the other group? Now, the Sadducees weren't at all into the Mishnah, the oral Torah. But what group was interested in this kind of stuff?
The Essenes?
The Essenes. Yeah, the Essenes. And guess what? This is found, well, we're going to see. Pretty interesting. Not the Mishnah. The chronology is based on multiple 7, etc., etc., God's decree. 2nd century Jews were likely Pharisees or Essenes, most likely Essenes. Until the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, the only surviving manuscript were the Ge'ez text, dating to the 15th and 16th century. But guess what we found? Time of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Matter of fact, they're also quoted by Justin Martyr, Origen, Diodorus of Tarsus, Isidore of Alexandria, Isidore of Seville, Eutychius of Alexandria, John of Males, George Sinaiticus. All these guys are ancient writers, early Christian apostolic writers. They all knew this document. So it's a very popular document. There's a preserved fragment in Latin that about a quarter of the work, and that's by the way in the Vatican. But there's about 27 entopic texts. Those are the Ge'ez texts that we have. They're the basis for our translations. The passages that are directly parallel to verses in Genesis don't. It's interesting. The Book of Jubilees is a very independent book, very interesting book. We found approximately 15 Jubilee scrolls in Qumran. That's the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Essenes knew about this book and maybe wrote it. It's a very important book to them. We have more of the Book of Jubilees than any biblical book except for Psalms, Deuteronomy, Isaiah, Exodus, and Genesis. So a pretty important book to the Essenes. Covers the same ground as Genesis. Let's see, is there anything else? It's elapsed time between to Moses. Let's see. You've got 4 classes of angels that are mentioned. Angels of sanctification, guardian angels over individuals, angels presiding over phenomena of nature. Where else did we hear about angels? Tobit. Remember what I told you? How do we know what we know about angels? From Tobit. And that was a New Testament view. Where else did they get New Testament view? Book of Jubilees. But guess what? We don't ever read it. So we don't have it. Let's see. About Enoch, etc., etc. There's a lot of stuff in here. Talks a lot in here is about the giants. The giants that are mentioned having, they had sex with women, and then they produced the giants, etc., etc. They died out in the flood, but whatever. There's a lot in there about these things. In any case, got too much here. Too much here. Now we're looking. Here are the allusions in the New Testament, and I don't have really time to go over the allusions in the New Testament. Just so you know, there's some from Romans, a couple from Romans here. Let's see. Yep. So we have 3 allusions. Actually, we could do this, I think. Allusion from Jubilees, but after this they will return to me in all uprightness and with all of their heart and soul, and I shall cut off the foreskin of their heart and the foreskin of the heart of their descendants, and I shall create for them a Holy Spirit, and I shall purify them so they will not turn away from following me from that day and forever. You know this text, right? In Romans, rather, a person is a Jew who is some inwardly, and a real circumcision is a matter of the heart. It's spiritual and not literal. Such a person receives praise and not from others, but from God. If you remember this Romans thing, this is almost a direct quote. He said to them, "Behold, I shall separate for myself a people from among the nations, and they will also keep the Sabbath. And I will sanctify them for myself, and I will bless them, just as I have sanctified, and I shall sanctify the Sabbath day for myself, and thus shall bless them, and they be my people, and I will be their God." You should recognize that from Romans, including us whom he has called, not from the Jews but also from the Gentiles. Let your hands, and there's even a stronger one than that, I know. So that's probably, if you look at the context within that. Let your hands be strong, let your heart rejoice in your son Jacob, because I love him more than all my sons. He will be blessed forever, and his seed will be one which fills all the earth. In Romans, for the promise that he would inherit the world did not come from Abraham or his descendants of the law, but through the righteousness of faith. These are all Romans quotes. So Paul appeared to know the book of Jubilees, and he was well read. So what would you expect him to know the book of Jubilees? Songs of Solomon. These are a group of 18 psalms, and religious songs or poems that are not part of any scriptural canon at all. They are found in the Peshitta, which is a Jewish book of psalms that is extra-biblical, and the Septuagint, but they're not included in the Apocryphal documents. This is why they're pseudegraphia, because they could not have been written by Solomon, but they're probably late, and when I say late, probably prior to AD, but in the BC period. They are much referenced in early Christian writings, but were lost to modern scholars until we discovered a Greek manuscript in the 17th century. One of those many documents that were lost, but luckily refound. We think, like I said, they're dating from the 1st or 2nd century. They are likely Hebraic or Aramaic originals. Remember those rabbis? They made a mistake sometimes. They mischose the wrong documents to get rid of. But in any case, they are anti-Maccabee. So do you see why they might have been excluded? Because the Maccabees were the messiahs, right? And the Pharisees supported them, and the Pharisees won at the end. And so guess which ones we get rid of? The ones we don't like, right? And anti-Maccabean. They show a clear awareness of the Roman conquest of Jerusalem under Pompey so that we can fit those in time. And they also metaphorically talk about Pompey as a dragon who had been sent by God to punish the Maccabees. Anybody remember dragons anywhere? Dragons in Revelation, right? The beast. So, you wonder where they got the ideas. Like I said, well known to Christian authors at the time. Some of the Psalms are messianic. That should be interesting itself. The majority are concerned less with the world at large, more with individual behavior, etc. Been attempts to link the text to the Essenes of Qumran, but they haven't found many scrolls, although there may be some, remember the Essenes separated themselves from the Pharisees. Pharisees controlled the synagogues, etc. Sadducees controlled the priesthood. So these are, I'm not going to go through all these. There's, let's see, how many of them? There's like 20, like I said, I've got too many allusions. You can go on the website, dig them out when I get them on. 31 allusions to the Psalms of Solomon written in around the period we're talking about in the New Testament documents. First, Enoch. It's an ancient Greek religious work ascribed to Enoch, but it can't be written by, right? That's why it's pseudegraphia, because he's a guy that got taken by God, right? It's a very long work. It's not regarded as canon of scripture by anybody, apart from Beta Israel canon. There is one Christian group, the Eastern Orthodox, or the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, that has it in its canon. Western scholars assert the older sections, primarily, and I didn't give, there's like 5 sections to this work that are pretty extensive, but mainly date from around 300 BC, so it's really early stuff. The later parts